And we're on the air.
Hello and welcome to another hour and however many minutes of Two and a Half Opinions. We're glad you have joined. I am Yishai,
Oh, I'm Frank.
I'm not the Rebbe.
and we are here to talk about the Torah portion Metzora, which usually is combined all into one with our previous Torah portion, Tazria. But this time they are separated because of, I believe it was a jubilee year or a
Leap year.
leap year or
Yeah, not
something.
yeah, not Jubilee, but a leap
You
year.
said jubilee last time, so
No, I
Okay.
didn't.
Anyways, it's a leap year, and so it's broken up to add an extra portion um, for the readings. But yeah, you're right. This is generally read as one reading, and when we go back and we see how it's introduced, we're talking about tuma and tahara, or impurity and purity, and what causes this impurity, and how do you become pure again. And this is really crazy stuff because this is not necessarily a physical medical condition. It's really not. When we go through here, there's physical aspects, but it's not a physical condition that's causing the impurity. We go back even further, back into Shmini. Remember back when we were reading Shmini, and we talk about certain animals, and I can have a pet pig. I can play with a pet pig. I can roll around in the mud with the pig.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not impure. I might need to take a shower, but I'm not impure. I'm not ritually impure. However, if that pig dies and I touch the carcass, even under the most USDA choice conditions, now I am impure. And now we continue on with impurity, and we've got a woman that has a child. What does she do wrong that causes
Nothing.
her impurity? And then we
Nothing.
come into this week's Torah portion. We have Zerat, and this is it's always translated as leprosy, but it's not Hansen's disease. This is something different, completely different. We've never seen anything like this, not in modern history, not at least for 2,000 to 3,000 years has this been seen or observed firsthand. So even the rabbis will tell you nobody knows what this really looks like other than the description and what the Talmud says.
But didn't you say that the reason or a possible reason, I should say, I don't want to misquote you. Possible reason why we don't have it anymore is because of our distance from God.
Yeah, we can go into that as we go on into it. I'm just trying to do the
Sure.
five second
Sorry.
5 second recap, which 5 seconds for me is 5 hours, but a second to Chris is an hour to the world or something like that. I don't
An
know
hour
how
to the world is
that.
only a second to Chris.
But then we go into some other things. My house can get Zerat. My garments can get Zerat. My clothing gets Zerat. What did my clothing do wrong? What did my house do wrong? And then we
Well,
have,
it's that disco shirt you continue to wear, Chris. I
you
mean,
don't like my silky shirt and bell bottom pants, really? So then we can go into the last aspect, and it's the Zav and Zava. Zav is male, Zava is female, and they have some type of issuance. Uh, what? I don't know. And all of these have one thing in common. Two things in common. We'll go with two things in common. Nah, stay with one. It's easier.
three
Nope, I'm
things?
going to go with
No.
three. One
Okay.
thing in common. All of them require a bath. The mikvah. So how do we relay or correlate this to anything else? Because we're going to constantly ask, where have we seen this before? What does this word really mean? And what are we to do with it? So with that, what are we reading, guys?
Jesse?
sorry, I stalled. My computer just freaked out. But we were going to read the first aliyah of this portion.
Okay. You froze up for a second. You got lightning in the area or something?
Hence why I said my computer's acting up. Go ahead and
Oh, I didn't hear you. So
I'll be right back.
okay. So I'll do the blessing. Okay.
Yeah, we've got some high winds, and I haven't seen lightning, but our lights did flicker a minute ago. Flickered, they didn't
Okay.
go out. So hopefully we can make it through.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Jesse's computer looks like it's. Are you? Let me know when Jesse's back, and then I'll do the blessing. So
Yeah, go ahead and do the blessing. If he
okay.
can't read, I'll read.
Okay. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Asher pakar banu mikol ha'amim bitan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai notein haTorah. Melech Ne'eman.
So we're Vayikra chapter 14, verse 1. And the Lord spoke unto Moses, saying, This shall be the law of the person afflicted with Zerat. On the day of his cleansing he shall be brought to the Kohen. The Kohen shall go outside the camp, and the Kohen shall look, and behold, the lesion of Zerat has healed in the afflicted person. Then the Kohen shall order, and the person to be cleansed shall take 2 live clean birds, a cedar stick, a strip of crimson, and hyssop. The Kohen shall order, and the one shall slaughter the one bird into an earthenware vessel over live or living waters. As for the live bird, he shall take it, and then the cedar stick, and the strip of crimson wool, and the hyssop, and along with the live bird, he shall dip them into the blood of the slaughtered bird over the living water. He shall then sprinkle 7 times upon the person being cleansed from Zerat, and he shall cleanse him. He shall then send away the live bird into an open field. The person being cleansed shall then immerse his garments, shave off all of his hair, and immerse himself in water, and become clean. After this, he may enter the camp, but he shall remain outside of his own tent for 7 days. And it shall be on the 7th day that he shall shave off all his hair on his head, his beard, his eyebrows, indeed all his hair he shall shave off. He shall then immerse his garments and immerse his flesh in water, thus becoming clean. And on the 8th day he shall take 2 unblemished male lambs, 1 unblemished ewe lamb in its first year, 3/10 of an ephah of fine mixed flour with olive oil, as a meal offering, and 1 log of olive oil. And the Kohen who is performing the cleansing shall place the person being cleansed together with these things before the Lord at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And the Kohen shall take 1 male lamb and bring it as a guilt offering, along with a log of oil, and wave them as a wave offering before the Lord.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Asher natan lanu Torah imet b'kayei olam nota b'tukenu. Baruch atah Adonai notein haTorah. Melech Ne'eman. So, if I got a washing machine big enough, I can immerse my clothes and myself at the same time.
Sure, why not? Well, no,
Yeah,
because
that seems like a murder, though.
yeah, it's got to be living water. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Living water. I mean, it's alive. It talks to you. What's living water?
Living water. Living water would have to be, I would say, something along the lines of a natural form of water that provides life.
Not necessarily.
And why I
It's
say
just moving. It has to be moving.
that's why I say that is because on the concept of moving water, stagnant water does tend to build up diseases, does tend to be a breeding grounds for flies and mosquitoes, things like that. Moving water does provide life for the fish and the animals in the area. In a nature sense, purely,
Yeah. So
rivers and streams provide that life.
Yeah, so the whole idea is that living water is moving. Then that's really it. It's moving. It's got life in it. It's moving. Not that it's filled with living creatures, but that it's moving. That's really the
And
basic understanding.
that's what I was trying to get at, but also make it sound on the subject of if you're applying it to nature, how would you find living waters in nature?
So would it be a picture of the rivers coming out of the Garden of Eden? Would that be what we'd like harken back to?
Yeah, no, and that's interesting. You bring that up, Jesse. Do you have something with that?
No. You hit it on the head because I was sitting here going, "Wow, I didn't think we'd jump into it this soon."
Yeah, but that's
Well,
exactly it. Is that so? God makes everything. We start off with this separation of waters. That's the first chapter in the very beginning. In the beginning of creating, God created the heavens and the earth, and the Spirit of God hovered over the waters. And then we see separation. The waters are separated from above and below, and in the middle is the sky. And then the waters below, he separates and he gathers some of them together over here, and the earth comes out underneath. And then we have plants and birds and fish and trees and animals, and then finally man. And well, now that's odd. It's
what?
almost it's the Spirit of God hovered over the waters. Everything came out of water. Is God Aquaman? Not, anyways,
No, God's much more powerful than Aquaman. Sorry.
well, okay, sure. He doesn't need a trident, but um, so everything comes out of waters, and it's these separations of waters and gathering the waters together in areas, and it's the whole zimzum of separation, contraction, and concealment and stuff. And out of all this, now we have a place where physical reality can come into being. We have physical reality, and God creates a garden after creating everything else. Now God creates a garden, just his own little spot within his creation, and he places man in there. And as we're going through all this description, all of a sudden it's like out of nowhere, the Torah stops and says, "Oh, by the way, you know what? There was a river that went through the garden, and that river had 5 headwaters that watered the entire earth." Meanwhile, back in the garden, and we continue on with the garden story. Why does it interrupt us with the rivers? But it's interesting you brought that up, because that whole water and living waters is there from the very beginning for us.
Right. And that's what, when we started talking about what we're going to read and what we're going to talk about, I was like, hey, wait a second. That's the same, and again, thanks to Brad, we think of in terms of an agrarian, or, the beginning words and how they are used throughout the text. And I thought, okay, well, the river in Eden. So,
And it's interesting you bring up the River of Eden, because the first time the word mikvah, which we'll eventually get to, I don't want to belabor it too much here, but the first time we get the word mikvah is the gathering of the waters below. When God gathers the waters below for the earth to come out, the eretz to come out, that word for gathering the waters, that's mikvah.
okay.
Food for thought for later
My
on.
brain works every now and then.
Wow, we've got a lot of food for thoughts around here, considering the way I left our last Torah portion off. I was going to delve into the concepts of what it takes to actually heal Sarat. Considering, didn't we say? I believe in our discussion between each other before we really got into this show today, we were trying to compare Sarat to Passover. It is an interesting concept, but if we pause to take a look at the way the healing the
Well,
affliction has been presented to us.
well, if Chris, is this the direction you're going? If we look at the idea of the blood and the hyssop with the wool and the cedar, then if we did the doorway, the 2 posts and the lintel, would that be making the house clean? So the angel of death, or God himself, actually would say, "Oh, that's clean. I don't touch that." and go on to the next one. Is that kind of what you were saying or thinking?
Yeah, we're definitely rushing to the end before we get to the
sorry.
beginning, but that's okay.
Sorry.
That's okay. What we talk about pre-show and trying to let each other know where we're coming from. Frank started off immediately by asking, and maybe we should just reenact that whole conversation. And he asked the question, Frank, what was your question? So what do we see in this Torah portion? I mean, that's Frank's usual question. He always asks the same thing. So what do we see? And I said, Pesach. And Jesse said, Pesach. And Frank had a very yeah. And that's the look Frank had on his face. Was, what?
Pesach.
And so, well, we tied together some symbolism or some things that have a correlation. At Passover, we take a lamb, we roast it whole, and in the instruction on roasting the lamb, we roast it with its head between its knees or in its knees. It's a fetal position, but it's roasted whole. First of all, we're going to slaughter the lamb, and we're going to take hyssop and dip it into the blood, and we're going to apply that to wood, the cedar, the doorposts, and the lintel, and it could make a letter chai, chet, for life. But blood is going to go over the entrance or exit of our house. We go into the house, and we're secluded inside the house all night long. And we're going to have this meal after the house has been cleansed, and we're going to eat this meal outside of the house. We're going to have death. What do we have with the leper? We have one bird that dies, one bird that's set free, that let loose out into the field. Ezekiel is going to give us this exact image of on the day that God found us, or that God saved us. It's Ezekiel chapter 16, verses 4 through 6. As for your birth, on the day you were born, your navel cord was not cut, nor were you washed with water for cleansing. Now, the cleansing is going to come when we cross the Yom Suf, the Red Sea. You were not rubbed with salt or even wrapped in clothes. But what he's trying to depict here is no one cared for you. On the day you were born, no one cared for you. Who's he talking to? He's talking to the entire community of Israel, the entire nation. He's not talking about an individual. We'll get with that one in a minute. This is the nation that is born. The prophets are going to come back in other places and various times talking about this aspect of who has ever seen this. Go back as far as you can recall. Your fathers, your forefathers, those before the flood. Nobody's ever seen or experienced anything like this, where in a day, a single day, God created or gave birth to a nation. Birth? You were not rubbed. Nobody cared for you. Nobody wanted you. No eye looked upon you with pity. Do any of these, or nor did they do any of these things for you. They had no compassion on you. Rather, you were thrown out into an open field. That live bird is let free in an open field. For you were abhorred on the day you were born. What did the Egyptians do? They literally chased him out.
Yeah.
The Egyptians said, "Get out."
Yeah. Well, they were afraid of God destroying them completely. Finally.
Sure. And in
I don't get the salt, though. I don't get the salt.
It's just a way of saying nobody took care of you on the day you were born.
Okay.
That's all that is. It's language showing that nobody cut your cord, nobody cleansed you, nobody rubbing you with salt as a way of salt is used as a cleansing and a healing aspect. But it's the whole aspect is nobody's taking care of the newborn. And then in verse 6 it says, "When I passed by you and saw you squirming in your blood." Where did God see the blood? On the doorposts and the lintels. "I said to you while you were in your blood, inside your house, live, chai." And he repeats it. "Yes, I said to you while you were in your blood, chai." He repeats that twice. It's an interesting aspect to it, but that's for a different time and a different story. So the whole point of this is in Ezekiel chapter 16, God is referring back to Pesach, that night. And what happened that night? We had the death of the firstborn and the life of the firstborn. We had blood applied. We had hyssop used. We had wood. We had all these aspects. And then later we're going to have the crossing of the Yom Suf of the water. So we have all the ingredients here. Does that mean there's an exact correlation? I don't know. I just think it's interesting that we have all the same ingredients here. Pesach and the cleansing of a leper.
Well, didn't
how do we bring that one into the picture?
Well, just saying about the coincidence, and coincidence is not a kosher word, as we know. But many years ago, we talked about history repeating itself. Well, history doesn't necessarily repeat itself, but it rhymes. Okay, it comes around and around, and certain things happen, yes, but not everything. It's not exact reproduction. So I just want to say that. So, huh? What?
I'm just trying to yell at Jesse, asking him if his computer's working, if he's
Oh,
good.
it's working. I'm good.
Oh,
I'm good.
okay.
So we start out with the whole idea as we started the show before we did our Torah reading of there's a tuma and tahara. A tuma makes something tameh or unclean, and we see through all these things. We've got several things in this Torah portion and Shemini I mentioned already, the non-kosher animals. Now you're not going to find kosher in Torah. An animal's never considered kosher or unkosher. It's always tuma or tahara. But in Shemini, in Parashat Shemini, we have those animals that are considered unclean, and if we touch them, then there's that transference. And it's odd. Rabbi Akiva or Hoffman or Kaplan, one of the rabbis, said that animals defy only after death. As long as they are alive, there's no defilement in them. However, man, even during his life, finds himself in situations where he serves as the source of defilement.
That's a rather interesting way to look at things.
Yeah.
It kind of leaves you wondering what he's trying to get at with the whole subject of we are the cause for defilement, if you will.
We are. The main point of what he's getting at really is that mankind, humans, are different from the animals and everything else. An animal is just an animal. That's it. While alive, it's not a matter of purity or impurity, but humankind, while alive, it is a matter of purity and impurity. And this is why everything we're reading in last week's Torah portion and this Torah portion have nothing to do with a medical condition.
If you don't mind me jumping in here briefly, your choice of wording brought to mind many things we've talked about in the past of the subject of this blending of animal and spiritual with humanity. Animals by themselves, they are not evil. They are not inherently evil. The animalistic nature of animals is what they do. They focus on their flesh. They are there to survive and continue to procreate and develop their species. But the way humanity uses their animalistic natures, their animalistic tendencies, is twisted just enough that the spiritual side of humanity says, that's not the way God intended it.
It's not serving its purpose. The animal serves its purpose, but is humankind serving its purpose when it tries or feeds upon the animalistic nature?
That's interesting because they're throughout the multiple studies of nature. Animals only grow to their environment that they can control. Man, on the other hand, extends his environment at will, and thereby causing, evil and hurt and pain and death and suffering.
Well, be fruitful and multiply. I mean, no, I'm just.
Yeah, so we continue along with the things that are pure and impure within last week's Torah portion. And this one, last week was Tazira, and we have the Yoledet, the woman that she becomes Tameh, impure, and this is a spiritual aspect. It's exhibited through physical, but we're talking about a spiritual thing here. Tameh, Tahara are a spiritual impurity or purity. So the woman, she becomes Tameh after giving birth? Now that makes no sense. Like you said, Jesse, what's the first commandment we're given? Be fruitful and multiply. Okay, I'm keeping the commandments. How did the commandment me keeping the commandment now just make me impure? That makes no sense. Then we go on to the Mitzorah, which is this week's Torah portion, one who contracts spiritual leprosy. Because we have nothing in this Torah portion that tells us what caused this leprosy. There is going to be a case, and only one case. And in fact, all of Torah, there's only one person that's recorded that contracted this type of leprosy, and that's Miriam. Hopefully we'll get to her. And then we're going to have the man with a seminal emission, whether it be what we call colloquially as a wet dream, or he was consummating his marriage with his wife. He's impure, but she's not. Now that's odd. I just had my conjugal visit with my wife, and I'm the one that's impure, but she's not? I wonder why. Food for thought. I don't know if we'll ever get there on that one, because that's a different subject. And then we have, throughout all of this, especially with a woman with an issuance of blood, this is not necessarily the menstrual cycle, but we keep on calling it nidah. Now, Judaism has given us the idea that nidah means a woman in her menstrual cycle. That's not what nidah means. Frank, what does nidah mean?
It means separation, plain and simple.
That,
separated for whatever reason. Nidah, separation.
Yeah, that's it. So we have no distinct instruction in all of Torah for a woman in her menstrual cycle. We do have for if her cycle continues beyond the period it's supposed to. We do have for after she gives birth and she's still bleeding. But isn't it interesting that if she gives birth to a male child, after the 8th day, the male child can be circumcised. Now suddenly, even if she continues to bleed, it's not impurity. It now is the blood of her purity? Tahara? That's weird. There's some crazy stuff going on here. But nonetheless, nidah means separation. So this is one of those weird points in all of Torah, and there's many of them in Torah, that there has already been given another teaching beyond what has been written down. This is why those that reject Talmud really need to take a second look at it. And for that matter, just read the Torah closely and be very careful of how you read it, because the Torah was written after it was spoken. After Moshe taught it, then it was written down. So just keep that in mind, that there was a teaching going on. Whether the Talmud is the absolute correct teaching or not, different subject, different thing altogether. My point is, this was taught orally before it was written down. And here is an example of it, is Moshe says in writing this, the woman is to be treated, or she's supposed to do, just like in nidah. Well, wait a minute, Moshe, you didn't tell us about nidah. Yeah, I know, but you're supposed to treat it just like nidah. Moshe, I can't find nidah written here anywhere in Torah. Yeah, I know.
You brought up that point.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. Your point was this: is that these practices must have been going on before the Torah was given. We all understand that Abraham, Yitzhak, Yaakov, they all taught and did. Jacob was in the tents of Shem, etc. So everything must have been being passed down. Maybe not to the detail that was given at Sinai, but all of the underlying principles.
Yeah. So yeah, whether it was already understood and known or it was orally taught, regardless, there's some background here that we're not getting if we're only reading and want to take everything. If it wasn't written down, then it didn't happen. Well, that's not necessarily true, because this is just one of those instances where no, there's something else that was already taught about the menstrual cycle of a woman and the separation period of time, and how that's treated, because the understanding is you have a separation of time, and then the woman goes through a mikvah and comes out, and they're back together again. And it's a very beautiful thing when you understand it in the light of the separation for a period of time, mikvah, going through the living waters, the waters of Eden, and coming back out again and being joined together. And then we end up with the Zav and Zava, and we have the same type of thing. A mikvah is done, but all of this is regarding purity and impurity. Why? We hit on it a little bit. Jesse, you mentioned the animal, but why are these things, or what is it about Tameh and Tahara, impure and pure, that a sacrifice is not needed to make me pure? In fact, there's no sin sacrifice offered here. Did anybody notice this with the leper? There's no sacrifice for sin. We equate leprosy with sin. We equate the zerat with some type of sin. Most commonly, it's gossip. That's what we all agree on.
But it's not a sin. In all honesty, it's not a sin. It's a moment where God is essentially saying, "Hold the phone. You want to do this?" As we tried to discuss in our previous Torah portion, in last week's portion, we tried to display that Zerat is of the understanding, because if you look at what Zerat does and how people treat Zerat, it is treated as if someone has died. It is treated as it is usually by the cause of an individual acting a certain way. And for those who have seen Torah with Friends and watched it earlier today, my father explained rather well how that applies even whenever it comes to houses, structures that have Zerat. It is always of that mindset of you are separating yourself from the community. You're not committing a sin, but you are distancing yourself from the whole. You're taking your piece and leaving the main structure. And because you are doing and because you are doing that, it is of that aspect of God saying, fine, fine. You want to leave the whole? You want to be holier than thou? You want to be
an
separate,
individual?
an individual, because God allows you to be an individual, but an individual to some degree, because you still have that communal aspect. You are you're two people, an individualistic self and a communal self. They cannot coexist. They cannot exist by themselves. You have to intermarry them.
So
it is to that mindset that
above your lip and say unclean, unclean, or no. I want to say that because you're actually telling the community, I'm unclean. You have a visible sign. And so if you're Zerat or whatever is a place where it's not normally seen, but unclean, unclean, and you run through the camp until you're out of it. And so you're doing a community information or infomercial until you get outside the camp.
Well, it is sort of like that, considering that it's essentially one of those moments where God says, "Fine, you wish to be separate from the camp. because of your haughtiness, because of your lack of humility, because of your lack of desire to help your fellow man, your lack of desire to speak kindly of your fellow man, then fine, be separate from the camp and think about what you did. Think about who you are and what you belong to. And then you can come back and try this again.
Yeah, so our one example of Zerat, and that's what's striking about all of this, is this Torah portion makes it sound like this happens all the time, every day. Somebody's coming down. Oh, look at me. Oh no, they're got white and whatever, or a house. Well, we're not even living in houses yet, Moshe. We're out in the wilderness. There's no house here. Yes, but when you get into the land, and there's a point with that one when we get to that. Um, it, so let's go back to that example, and it was in Parasha Beholoteka, which is, well, not back. It's going to be forward. Actually, it's going to be in Bamidbar or Numbers chapter 12, and we start out with Miriam and Aaron, and they're talking about the Cushite woman that Moses married, and then they go straight into Moses isn't the only prophet. Don't we all prophesy? And it's a weird conversation going on there. And then all of a sudden, God shows up on the scene, and it's almost like dad coming in the room with a bunch of children, and he says, "Boak Shav." That means get over here right now. I mean, he really. This is what it says. Even in some of the translations, it says, "Suddenly God says," or God says with haste, or however it's translated. But the idea is God immediately says, "Get over here now, right now. Come here. You
Don't make me stop this car. Don't make me come back there.
Exactly. And he says, get over here. Get over to the Mishkan now. I mean, he's like stopping the conversation. This is an emergency. God shows up and says, get over here right now. Come here. Get over here. And
Yeah.
and they all three of them, Aaron, Miriam, and Moshe, they run up to the Mishkan. And God says, Aaron and Miriam, get closer. You two come up a little bit closer. And they come up closer, and the cloud descends. And what does God say? He says, there's going to be lots of prophets, guys. And I'll talk to a prophet the way I talk to a prophet. I'll talk to a prophet in parables. I'll talk to him in visions. I'll talk to him in dreams. But not Moses. Moses is the only one I speak to face like friends. Could you imagine what you would feel at that point in time? You just made the declaration that we're all prophets. And you separated Moses out because he married that Cushite woman. What makes him better? Look, he even married a Cushite. Wow. Miriam, Aaron, not only did you set yourselves up as equal to Moshe, you separated yourself from Moshe. There's a sense of haughtiness in this. That's really at the heart of it. It's not just the gossip. It's the source, the heart condition, the spiritual condition. And as soon as the cloud departs, what happens? Miriam is Zerat. She becomes a Metzorah. And Aaron looks at her, and he immediately relates this to, what does he say? Al natati chamet asher betzeto mer. My Hebrew is so bad. Merachem imo ve'echel chatzi ve'sorah. My Hebrew, forgive me, my Hebrew is so bad. Please let her not be as one dead, as though she comes from her mother's womb, flesh half consumed. He's literally saying, please, Moses, don't let her become a stillborn. Wow. So Aaron's description of Zerat is someone walking around that's dead. Please don't let her be like a stillborn. It's a strange thing to say. Is this just a figure of speech? Or do we have a precedence for this? We do have a precedence. Because when Moshe appears before Pharaoh for the last time, he uses the phrase, Umet kol bekor, Metzraim. The firstborn of Egypt is dead. But that's not how it's translated. Exodus 11:5 always translated as
They will die.
the firstborn of Egypt will die. But the Hebrew is the firstborn of Egypt is already dead. Jesse, how would you say will die? Our Torah says umet kol bekor, all the firstborn.
To say will die, it would be that. How was it? Ve'omot.
Ve'amot
Kol
will
bekor.
die. Kol bekor is all firstborn. Ve'amot is will die, but the Torah says umet, which is dead. Huh. The firstborn of Egypt are dead? This is a troubling thing. Firstborn of Egypt will die. We know that because they haven't really died yet, but Moshe or God is saying they're already dead and they don't know it. But here we're going to have with the Zerat someone that is living, though they have the appearance of being dead and therefore must be separated in their uncleanliness. What causes this?
So I just want to bring up a question. What about Aaron? Why wasn't Aaron struck with leprosy? Or, excuse me, Zerat? But we don't have to answer that right now. I'm just, the question's out there. When you read it, I was like, okay. So.
It's an interesting concept. I've not found anybody that touches on it.
Okay.
Coming from the naive perspective, someone who's just looking at it and not really trying to study it in depth, I would dare say one of two suggestions. Either one, Aaron only heard what Miriam was saying and did not add to it. But he did not talk against what Miriam was saying either, and so that's why he was yelled at by God as well. Or the other possibility, and the lot less likely possibility, and this is just thinking at it in a very, very selfish human way of viewing it, God still needs a high priest. But that's a highly unlikely possibility.
Well, and I think you hit it on the head. Is that Aaron listened to it, and he didn't stop it because Aaron's immediate words were not. His immediate words were basically, "Don't account this sin on both of us," and he basically is saying it was accidental. But yet it was Miriam that struck down, and the implication is, and you're correct, Jesse, is that she's the one that spoke it. Aaron made room for it. He listened to it. So they're both guilty, but she is the one that gets struck down with it. And then the other side is, I think you might have a point there, is that the high priest still needs to be involved. And so he's going to get his eventually, but right now, to prove the point, Miriam, sorry, you're the instigator.
I didn't get us off track. I just, because the question's sitting there waiting to be asked, so I asked it.
No, I think it's a good question. I think it's a very valid question.
And it's why I'm only wording a answer in the aspect of, this is just me guessing. This is me giving an opinion without something to back it up.
I
He was.
can't
He
hear you,
was.
sir.
Yeah, I need to unmute my mic. I said, so where do we go? I mean,
Well, this Torah portion does talk about the cleaning of Sarat. At least a good chunk of this portion delves right into the cleaning of Sarat. And we mentioned multiple times, it sounds like Passover. So how do we go about explaining that one? How do we delve into that?
okay, so we showed some correlation here. We've got some images that we can see in Passover, and the images that we see here with the cleansing of Zarat. And by the way, cleansing of Zarat is not necessarily what the Torah says, and it's not necessarily what's going on. The Zarat has gone away, and the person now wants to come back into the camp, be welcomed back into the community. Isn't it odd that there's nothing here that tells us what happened to make the leprosy go away? Now, with a woman that bears a child and she becomes unclean, it's just a matter of time, and now she's clean again. And here's what you do to enter back into the camp. The Zav and Zava at the end of our Torah portion, it's pretty much the same thing. As long as there's that issuance, they're unclean. The Torah doesn't address how it stopped, how the Zarat, how the Zav, the Zava, how the woman with an issuance of blood, how it is healed, stopped, or anything in that matter. It doesn't address that. What it's addressing is, how do you enter back into the community?
I can speak sooner or later. I will. One of the rabbis was saying something about, as you two have been saying, it's an outward sign of an inward condition, and that the leper, if you will, for lack of a better term, has to come to the high priest, whereas the high priest has to come to the leper. But it only happens when the leper wants to repent. And that's what the general theme is that the leper or the person inflicted with Zarat wants to repent. Changes, has to change his heart. And then comes and the two meet, and the high priest goes, or the priest goes, okay, he's clean. Go clean yourself. Go, immerse yourself.
Yeah, and that's why sometimes we need to pay more attention to those sacrifices and all the rules and laws of the sacrifices. We have a Thanksgiving sacrifice. We have the free will sacrifice. We have an olah. We have a chatat, the sin offering, and we also have a guilt offering. I'm not going to explain the guilt offering again. We've already discussed this. You should know what a guilt offering is by now. What do we bring here? We don't bring a sin offering. We don't bring a Thanksgiving offering. We bring a guilt offering. This is after I've discovered I sinned. Oops, I didn't mean to. Because sometimes the tongue just goes loose. I mean, even the New Testament tells us to bridle the tongue and how dangerous the tongue is. Ecclesiastes is filled with things about how dangerous the tongue is. The sages on the Christian side, the Jewish side, any side at all, always reminds us, if we could ever just control our tongue, we'd be a heck of a lot better off. So he brings the guilt offering, but that's after he's been cleansed. He's no longer Zarat. He's no longer a Metzorah, but he's not welcome into the camp yet.
But you can only bring a guilt offering if you know that you're guilty.
So you come to the recognition of exactly what I did. And this time out in the corner, go spend some time out, you're nidah, and that's exactly the words. The Metzorah is in nidah. They're separated. Your time of separation. And it's interesting, that time of separation, that's exactly what God said about Miriam. Because Moses pleaded. He pleaded with God, don't do this to her. And he said, now wait a minute. Even if a father had spit in his daughter's face, would she not bear her own shame?
For 7 days.
So for 7 days, she's going to be nidah. and then you can bring her in. But we don't. There's no instructions on it. The instructions are here on how she can come back in. That's interesting. Really, it's truly fascinating. You have to go out, and there's almost like a cooling off period for all of us, where we're really thinking about this and realizing I just put myself above the community. I was a little bit haughty. I thought I had something to teach and nobody was listening to me, so I was going to make bad about the teacher, the pastor, the preacher, the Cohen. I'm going to make fun of the Talmud. Because I know better. I'm an evolved Christian. I'm evolved man. I'm Christian man. I'm making fun because that's what Brad Scott always.
You're quoting Brad Scott.
Yeah,
big
Brad
time
Scott always
there.
does that. And I love that. I love that because it's so true. We have adopted in the Messianic community. We've adopted the theological evolution from Christians, and that is way back there was Adam, and he was just too stupid to not eat from a tree. I mean, how hard is this? And then, well, Noah, he's a little bit better, and he makes some sacrifices. And then Abraham, well, he's almost like the Renaissance man. Abraham creates a new religion. And then we're going to come along, and we're going to get Moses. Now there's a spiritual man. He's a little bit more grown up than even Abraham, because now Moses is going to give us some laws. But those laws are just temporary, and they're symbolic of stuff. They don't really mean it, even though you're going to die if you don't keep it. It's symbology. I'm going to die if I don't keep symbology? Really? Okay.
That would forgive me for taking this quick jab, but that would be like saying I'm going to die just because I did not bow to Zeus.
Yeah,
Zeus.
Exactly. I mean, but anyways, but now we have, because of Jesus, now we all know better. We have evolved. We know better than those silly dancing Jews and their Talmud. I mean, we've evolved. We've gotten better. Oh my goodness! If we would get over our own pride, because in this whole thing with Miriam and Aaron and the gossip, do we remember what was said? Actually, it was not said, it was written. They accuse Moses of marrying a Cushite woman. And then they bring about, we're all prophets. And then, almost as if it's a parenthetical statement, now Moses was the most humble man. And then we continue with the story. And it's hitting us in the face. The heart of what's going on with Miriam, the heart of what's going on with someone, the Metzora, is this arrogance, this pride, thinking you know better. You have a better way. Wow. As soon as I think I know better and I have a better way, as soon as I can talk bad about somebody else, I have separated myself from the community that God himself birthed on Nisan 15, the Erev of 14 and 15. That night, and as soon as the day broke, we rushed forth into the field like the bird that was released, while the living dead stayed. Their cattle were dead, their horses were dead, their crops were dead, their firstborn were dead. Firstborn. Even in Egyptian culture, the firstborn was considered the priest of the family. The firstborn was the head of the family. The firstborn inherited all rights and privileges. They lost a generation of firstborn. They're the walking dead, without leadership, without acknowledgement, without spiritual guidance. Egypt becomes the spiritual dead. Egypt is now the Metzora.
And they lost Pharaoh. They lost most of their army, if not all of it. They lost a bunch of stuff.
Yes. And so we see all of it, the blood and the water, whether it be the Nile turning to blood or the pride and the strength of Egypt, which would be its army, is going to be slaughtered in water. Blood and water mixed there. But what comes through? The live bird, set free into the wilderness. So we have this correlation as since we're approaching Passover this coming Friday night, and Saturday being Passover, it's something to really think about. If I am envisioning, and I've kind of passed over this because Jesse, I don't know if you wanted to get into it, or Frank, I think you wanted to get into the mikveh.
Oh, okay.
We really probably should be looking at ourselves as the Metzora, the leper, as we go into Friday night. When we sit down and we retell the story, there's 4 times that Torah tells us to tell teach your children, or tell your children about the Passover and how we came out of Egypt. And we have the 4 sons that ask the 4 questions, and then we have 4 categories of people. And there's always, the sages teach there's actually a 5th category, and that's the one that's not even present at the table. And it's the one that's not present at the table that has excommunicated themselves, the Metzora. But I think we should all really look at ourselves as that Metzora. I am a leper, and this is my opportunity for a rebirth, a reintroduction into the community of God. I know some might take offense to me saying a rebirth here at Passover, but that's really what Passover is. And it delves into the whole aspect of the mikveh, because each one of these aspects of Tameh, it takes the mikveh. That really is the heart of it. That's the connection of all of it, is the mikveh. And even as we pass through the waters, even though it was on dry land, that was a form and a type of a mikveh, because we come out on the other side. Before we pass through, Moshe says, "Be still, shut up, stand still and see the salvation of God." And we pass between the waters. Why waters? Frank, Jesse, you guys want to go into the mikveh and the immersion here?
The thing that's most important is understanding that whether you believe New Testament and just look at the Old Testament, or you take the Old Testament to heart, it's not the Old Testament. It is the Testament. It's only God. It's only our Father in heaven who can wash us clean of sins. That's the mikveh. Walking through the waters, even if it is, like you said, Chris, on dry land, you're still walking through the waters. There's a separation between the waters and the waters, right? Think about that. It's almost as if it's a birth canal. You're being reborn. Jesse, you got something else?
The subject of mikveh is an extensive one. But I think to try to sum it up, let's go back to the beginning. Because I do remember before we started this show, we actually spoke about how mikveh is seen even in the garden. The understanding of mikveh is seen even in the garden. And my mind is failing me on trying to remember how we were discussing that, but it was of the subject matter of.
Well, we were talking about creation first, and how it was through the waters creation came about, and then within that creation, God sets apart a garden where He has special time and a special relationship with man. And it was only when man took it upon himself to say, "You know what? I want that. And because I want that, it should be good for me." We're talking about the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And it's the tree of knowledge of good and evil is the only place where we see good and evil being mixed. As soon as we eat of this, Now we recognize evil, but there's a mix-up in this evil because it's shrouded in good, and good is shrouded in evil. And we can't fully discern what is good and what is evil in all instances. Before we partook of it, we were perfect. Adam was perfect in every way. The skin that he had, it shone. It was almost translucent. It was only afterwards that he recognized, I'm translucent, I'm naked. And God has to provide skins for him, an earth suit, if you will, so that he now can continue to exist outside of the garden in this diminished state of mixed up good and evil, a mixture of good and evil.
When you add the whole understanding of a mixture of good and evil, forgive me for quoting a movie on this one of all things, but it is that mindset that could it very well be that the moment you took the moment that Adam and Eve both took the bite of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, their immediate understanding of said mixture of good and evil was good is a point of view.
Yeah, it's relative now.
It is all relative.
Because before then, Adam didn't need to know what was evil. There was nothing evil for him. There was no such thing as evil for him. There was no sin for him.
It was a black and white of sorts.
So are you saying that because he didn't have to have the knowledge of good and evil, that he was fulfilling his function?
Yes, absolutely. But, and we're going to go back into a different realm, and I don't want to do that just yet. That really is for a deeper and longer teaching. But here he's kicked out, and there's stories that's not in the Torah, it's in extra biblical writings, Jewish writings, where Adam told Eve, Eve, you go sit in that river, and I'm going to go sit in this river to be cleansed. These rivers were the rivers that came out of the Garden of Eden. And that they were searching for the mikveh, and they understood the reason and the teaching of the mikveh even then. Got to remember, Adam was created perfect. He had full knowledge of everything. He had full wisdom of everything. He had perfect and pure prophecy of everything. Nothing was hidden or kept from him. And so they go and sit in these waters. And once again, Eve is deceived by Hasatan. And anyways, I'm really digressing, and I don't mean to do that. But the whole point is, why would he do this, and why is the necessity of a mikveh here of you have to be fully immersed, and then when you come out, you're welcome back in as though you've been reborn. Because the earth was created out of waters. We go back to the beginning. The first mikveh was just that. God gathered the waters so that the earth can come out. And we get the perfect vision of a womb. And where is a child? Suspended inside this womb in water. When that water breaks, then there's a mixture of blood and water as the child comes through. So this is a new birth, a rebirth. First, second, third time, it doesn't matter. I'm not going into really esoteric stuff here. It's just that there's a birth process. And that's what we're talking about here is I have separated myself from the firstborn of God. Israel is God's firstborn. I've separated myself from the firstborn of God. The only way I can return is through some aspect of going through those waters again. And so we have the immersion, the mikveh. Now, the very striking thing about all of this comes about in Jeremiah. There's two places, in Jeremiah 14 and Jeremiah 17, where it speaks of God as being the hope of Israel. And that's how it's always translated. Jeremiah 14:8 says, O hope of Israel, its Savior in a time of distress, why are you like a stranger in the land, or like a traveler who has pitched his tent for the night? Jeremiah 17:13 says, O Hashem, O Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, O Lord, the hope of Israel. All who forsake you will be put to shame. Those who turn away on the earth will be written down because they have forsaken the fountain of living water, even Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. Now here's the striking thing. The hope of Israel in both places, Jeremiah 14 and Jeremiah 17, the hope of Israel is mikvah. Mikvah. The mikvah of Israel is God. We go through his living waters. He's brought us through the living waters. The mikvah is made of living waters. All of this comes back to and reminds us that when God called the dry land and the gathering, the mikvah of the waters, he called the seas. He saw that was good. The gathering of these waters, the mikvah of waters. And from the mikvah of waters comes forth life. So you too, because of your haughtiness, because of your arrogance, and because of my pride, I am separated from the firstborn of Israel. Now I must go back through those waters. And all the aspects of this is reminiscent of that first Passover. The two birds, one dies, one goes free. The blood applied with hyssop. The cedar of which the blood is applied upon. Being locked up in a womb in my room all night long on that night, and then bursting forth on the day of the 15th. It really is, all of this is the spiritual impurity. And it's because of my understanding, relevance, and cognizance of what causes impurity. Now I teshuvah, I return. I repent and I return. But there's still a process that I've got to go back through the Passover again. That's an interesting way of looking at it.
So,
guys, anything?
Well, let me ask you a question. In the New Testament, where it says it's like the clay telling the potter what should be done. I can't remember where that's at.
Oh yeah, who is the?
Yeah. I can't remember the verse. It was like something along the lines of "Shall the clay tell the potter
How it's to be made? Yeah.
Right. Right. So that's the level of haughtiness, and I don't care, Christian, Jew, Buddhist, whatever. If you're at that point, well, you're at that point. You're outside the camp because
even Paul, yeah, even Paul brings up the whole idea of you're an individual only as so much as you're part of the community. Whenever he says, can everybody be a foot? Can everybody be a hand? Can everybody be an eye or a mouth? No. Now, unfortunately, I think there's a lot of us that are we've. No, I'm not going to say it. Frank, Frank, you'll say it. We're all sphincter muscles, but we've got an overabundance of sphincters here. But
because you chose that wording, I now must state that on multiple accounts, that was the only way I could ever explain it to anyone. The difference between at least based on the understanding in Judaism, the priest, the everyday Jew, the
just the different categories of being part of the nation. Yeah.
Yes. And through that, the explanation was the Jew is not better. The priest is not better than the Jew. The Jew is not better than the rest of the nations. No, that is not the case in the slightest. They each have different roles. My nose cannot represent my eye. My foot cannot represent my hand. They each have their different role. They each have their different goal and the word is slipping me. I'll just stick with goal in life. Potential. There we go. That's the word that was slipping me. They each have their different potential in life that God had set forth as to what they need to achieve.
Okay.
Yes.
In other words, they have their own function.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and I want to just mention this as one wrap up on the going through the waters. Rabbi Akiva, um, and Rabbi Akiva was about just before the destruction of the Second Temple, and he says, "Happy are you, Israel, for whom do you purify yourselves, and who purifies you? It is your Father in heaven. It is written, I will sprinkle pure water upon you, and you shall be clean." And he's quoting Ezekiel 36:25. I will sprinkle pure water upon you, and you shall be clean. And again it is written, and now he's going to quote Jeremiah 14:8. God is Israel's mikvah. Here Rabbi Akiva translates it properly. God is Israel's mikvah. Just as the mikvah purifies the unclean, so God purifies Israel. And so we see with this impurity and purity, it's a spiritual condition. We've brushed up against our own mortality. We've brushed up against the possibility of death, with whether it be the egg being flushed out of a woman's body or the child being born. We've brushed up against our own mortality, whether it be the semen not meeting up with the egg and cultivating there, whether it be a discharge from our sexual organs, or the seed of our lips, the words of our mouth, taking root someplace and casting disparaging things or separation. Only gossip will separate husband and wife. Only gossip will separate children from parents. Only gossip will separate best friends from each other.
Well, didn't you said it before, and it bears repeating. If I talk evil of you, then I am killing you in the eyes of whoever I'm talking evil about you too.
Absolutely. So it brings about death, but there's not a strict commandment against this, and one has to wonder why. And I'm not going to go into it because we're really at the end of our time here. But what we're getting to is there has to be a rebirth of this. So you Southern Baptists out there, which I was one, went to the Oklahoma Baptist University. I know the Southern Baptist doctrine. Yes, you can go through your rebirth again. In fact, we're going to do it Friday night. I hope you do too.
So, how would you wrap up? So, Frank, how would you wrap up? Because since we are nearing the end, how would you do a synopsis?
I'm going to be irreverent, and I'm going to say that Chris is going to smoke a turd in hell because he just told the Baptists they can go through it again. But no, wrap up is simple as far as I can see. It is God who washes us clean. That's it. That's what this is talking about. How do we come back into the group, the community, our family, our friends, our neighbors? Repentance. It is God that causes a change here that allows me to be cleansed and come back in. That's all I got.
And for me, I'd probably do a wrap up of how I see how last week's portion and this week's portion go wonderfully hand in hand. They blend perfectly because last week's portion spoke of what causes Surat, what causes destruction, what needs to happen in order to bring about a restoration. And this Torah portion delves into the details of what needs to happen to make it complete, to bring that separation. Forgive me for going Messianic on this one, and I mean Messianic in the statement of the Messianic era. What brings about the restoration of returning back to what you belong to? As many Jews in the diaspora would cry out for, we want Mashiach. That is what brings forth the restoration. It's a similar concept, only on a much smaller scale, a much more individual and personal scale is what Surat deals with and what you need to return to.
Yep. Okay, so I guess that's it, right?
That's all, folks.
That's all, folks.
Okay. I'm Frank.
I'm Yishai.
I'm not the Rebbe.
And this is 2.5 Opinions. We're glad you joined us. We hope you had fun. We hope you learned something new or found something that we had not seen yet, because as we are here for, we are here to give another opinion to the mini batch of understanding truth.
And yet the only opinion that really matters with all of us is what's God's opinion on this? And that's why we try to delve into it and look at it a little bit closer, a little bit deeper, and connect the dots sometimes, asking, where else have I seen this?
Exactly. So with that, have a good night. Shavua Tov, Laila Tov, Yisroel. Shabbat Shalom. We'll see you next week.
Maybe